Upper Egypt, December 1945. A farmer digging for fertilizer near Nag Hammadi struck a sealed clay jar buried at the foot of a cliff. Inside were 13 leather books the church had set aside more than 1,500 years before. One of them claimed to hold the secret sayings of Jesus, words you have likely never heard read aloud in any sanctuary you have ever sat in. They were not lost. Pages like these were once fed to fires, and someone hid this jar in the ground instead of letting it burn. The book is called the Gospel of Thomas. It does not tell a story. It is a list of 114 sayings, each one beginning the same way, each one putting words in the mouth of a living teacher. Tonight, I am going to take it down off my shelf, open it on my table, and read it to you line by line. Here is the question that sent me looking. What did these buried pages claim that Jesus said? Not what a sermon told me, he said. Not what I had been handed across 50 years of Sunday mornings. What was written on the page itself, in the ground, hidden by a hand that thought it worth saving. When you reach a certain age, when you have stood at more than one graveside, a question like that stops being academic. It keeps you up. I needed to see the words for myself. And the words in this book are not small ones. Thomas has Jesus promising that whoever cracks the meaning of these sayings will never taste death. It has him claiming to be the light spread over all things, hidden inside the wood and under the stone. Some of it will sound like a verse you half remember from your own Bible. Some of it will sound like nothing you have ever heard cross his lips. That gap between the familiar and the foreign is the whole reason I could not put the book back on the shelf. I had to know which side of that line each saying fell on. I think you will want to know too. So let me be plain with you before we take one more step. I am not here to tell you this book is true. I have come to believe these sayings are one reading among many, and a late one at that. We are going to weigh every line against the four Gospels you already know: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The old letters say to test every spirit, and that is exactly what we are going to do. I am unafraid to look. You should not be afraid either. Read it with me and decide for yourself. Let me take you back to that morning, because the way this book came back to us matters as much as what it says. The man with the shovel was named Muhammad Ali al-Saman. December of 1945, near the town of Nag Hammadi, along a bend in the Nile in Upper Egypt. He and his brothers had ridden out to the base of a cliff called the Jabal al-Tarif to dig soft earth they used to feed their fields. His mattock hit something hard in the ground. Not a rock, a red earthenware jar, taller than a man's knee, sealed at the mouth. He hesitated before he broke it. The story he told later was that he feared a spirit, a jinn, might be trapped inside. Then he thought there might be gold, and the fear of a spirit lost to the hope of treasure. He shattered the lid. There was no gold. Inside were 13 books, bound in soft leather, their pages made of papyrus and covered in a looping script. The language was Coptic, the old tongue of Egypt's Christians, written in Greek letters. He could not read a word of it. For a time, some of those priceless pages were used as kindling in his mother's oven. Sit with that. The most talked about manuscript find of the century nearly burned for cooking fuel, 1,500 years after it was first hidden to keep it from the flame. What he had pulled out of the ground were the Gnostic Gospels. To understand why anyone hid them, you have to understand what the word means. Gnosis is simply the Greek word for knowledge, and that one word is the whole hinge of this story. The people who treasured these books believed that what saves a soul is not faith, not the cross, not grace, but secret knowledge. a hidden wisdom passed to a chosen few that wakes the spark of the divine sleeping inside you and lets it climb back home, past the powers that rule this lower world. It went further than that, and you should hear how far. In the fuller Gnostic picture, the God who made this world of dirt and bodies was not the highest God at all, but a lesser, lower craftsman who trapped sparks of light inside flesh. Salvation, in that telling, was waking up to the secret that you do not belong here, that your true home is far above this maker, and climbing back to it by knowing the password the powers cannot answer. I read that, and I understand why it drew people. It flatters the part of us that has always felt like a stranger in our own skin. But it is a long way from the faith I was raised in. Now hold that next to the 4 Gospels you grew up with. In Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the door is thrown wide open. A thief on a cross gets in. A tax collector gets in. Fishermen who never understood half of what they were told get in. The promise there is not for the clever. It is for the broken, the poor in spirit, the ones who simply trust. The Gnostic claim runs the other direction. It says the kingdom is for the ones who know, the initiated, the ones let in on the riddle. That is not a small difference in tone. I have come to see it as a difference at the root. 2 different answers to the oldest question a frightened person ever asks. How am I saved? By knowing a secret or by being held? So, where did these books come from? Most readers who have spent their lives on this date, the bulk of them to the 2nd century. The 100 years that came after the 4 Gospels were already circulating and being read aloud in gathered churches. They are later. The Gospel of Thomas itself may carry a few early echoes, and we will get to that. But as a collection, these texts arrive after the apostles are gone. They did not drop out of the sky in secret. They had names attached to them, teachers who taught from them out in the open. One of the most famous was a man called Valentinus, a brilliant and persuasive teacher in Rome who nearly became a bishop. He drew crowds. He had followers across the empire. And the disagreement over what he taught was not a quiet thing done in the dark. It was a loud, public argument, and we still have the paperwork. Around the year 180, a bishop in Gaul named Irenaeus sat down and wrote 5 books cataloging these teachings and arguing against them, line by line. He named names. He quoted their ideas back at them. I want you to hear that clearly, because it cuts against the easy story. This was a debate carried out with ink and signatures and councils, men reasoning in the light over which books belonged. That is a very different picture from a midnight raid on your Bible. I should tell you where I am standing when I read all this, because I am not a scholar in a library. I am an old printer at a kitchen table in Detroit, and along the wall by that table is a shelf of books the church set aside, the ones I went and found after the Sunday Answers stopped holding. I started collecting them the year after I buried my wife Della in 2014. The night of her funeral, I could not sleep, and I realized I did not actually know where she had gone. 50 years in a pew, and I did not know. My father set type for the church bulletin every week of my childhood, and he raised me to trust that if a book mattered, it would be inside my Bible. I am still not all the way comfortable reading the ones he left out, but I could not unask the question, so here I am, reading them with you anyway. That is the shelf this book came off of. That is the spirit I am bringing to it. Not a man trying to tear down the faith his mother sang in. A man who needed an honest answer badly enough to go looking in the hard places. Keep that in mind as we open the pages, because what Thomas actually says is stranger and in some places more familiar than you might expect. So, let me open it. The first thing you notice about the Gospel of Thomas is what is missing. There is no Christmas in it, no star, no manger, no shepherds. There is no baptism in the Jordan, no walking on water, no feeding of the 5,000. And here is the one that stops you cold the first time you see it. There is no cross, no trial before Pilate, no crown of thorns, no empty tomb on the third morning. The whole spine of the story you have heard your entire life, the death and the rising, is simply not here. What is here instead is a list. 114 sayings, strung together like beads, most of them starting with the same 3 words. Jesus said. That is the whole shape of the book. No narrative carrying you from one scene to the next. No Sunday school arc. Just saying after saying after saying, dropped onto the page with no story around them. The opening line sets the tone for everything that follows. It reads, "These are the secret words which the living Jesus spoke, and which Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down." Secret words. Right there in the first sentence, the book tells you its whole theory of itself. The truth here is hidden, and only a few will be handed the key. Read that opening aloud sometime, and let the strangeness sit. The 4 Gospels never call themselves secret. They are proclaimed from rooftops, preached to crowds, carried to the ends of the earth. This one leans in close and whispers, "I am not telling you that is sinister. I am telling you it is different, and you should feel the difference in your chest before we go one line further." Now look at the very first saying, because it lays the foundation. Thomas saying, 1. Whoever finds the interpretation of these words will not taste death. Read it again. Not whoever believes, not whoever follows, whoever finds the interpretation. The promise of eternal life is hung on solving the riddle, on cracking the hidden meaning. The reward goes to the mind that figures it out. Now I want to put a verse beside it, one you may already know. The Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 51. There Jesus says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, if a man keep my saying, he shall never see death." Hold the 2 lines in your 2 hands. They sound like cousins, don't they? Both promise that death will not have the final word. But look at the verb that carries the weight. In Thomas, you must find the interpretation. In John, you must keep the saying. One asks you to decode. The other asks you to hold fast and obey. One is a puzzle for the clever. The other is a command for the faithful. I have sat with those 2 verses for a long time at that table, and I will tell you honestly that this is one reading among many, and a careful person can hear them differently than I do. But here is where I keep landing. The God of the 4 Gospels does not hide the way home behind a riddle that only a genius can solve. He hands it to fishermen. That distinction is going to matter more and more as we go deeper into these sayings, because some of what comes next sounds beautiful, and some of it sounds like nothing Jesus ever said in the books we trust. Stay with me. We are only getting started, and the strangest line is still ahead. Now let me show you the line that draws people in. Thomas, saying 77. It reads, Jesus said, "I am the light that is over all things. I am all. From me all came forth, and to me all attained. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there. Split the wood, and I am there. Lift the stone, and you will find me there." I have read that line 100 times, and it still lands. There is something in it that reaches for the bigness of God, the sense that He fills every crack of the world, that you cannot lift a single rock without lifting it off of Him. And it is not a stranger to your Bible either. Listen to Paul in the letter to the Colossians, chapter 1, verse 17. He is before all things, and by him all things consist. By him all things hold together. The wood holds together because he holds it. The stone keeps its shape because he keeps it. So when Thomas says, "Split the wood and I am there," part of me hears an echo of something true, a poet reaching for the same mountain Paul was pointing at. But here is how I read that line when I sit with it at my table, late, with the lamp on. The beauty of it is real, and I will not pretend it isn't. What I notice, though, is what it quietly leaves out. Paul says, Christ holds the wood together, and then Paul walks straight to a cross and an empty grave. Thomas gives me the light in the stone, and then hands me nothing to do with my grief. It is a gorgeous line with no funeral in it. And I have buried people. I needed more than a light in the rock. I needed to know what happens to the ones who go into the ground. So let me be fair to this book, because honesty cuts both ways. Some of what is in Thomas is not strange at all. It is downright familiar. You will turn a page and run straight into parables you already know. The sower who scatters seed, the mustard seed, the smallest of them all, growing into a great shrub, the treasure hidden in a field. These show up in Matthew and in Luke, almost word for word, which tells you the man who gathered these sayings had heard the same teaching the four gospel writers heard. There is real overlap, threads of the same cloth. And then, without warning, it veers. You will be reading along, nodding at a parable you recognize, and the next saying turns a corner into something you have never heard from the lips of Jesus in any church. Sayings about the spirit escaping the prison of the body. Sayings that treat the maker of this world with suspicion. And the strangest of all, the final saying, where a woman is told she must become male to enter the kingdom. I am not going to dress that up for you. It is jarring. It does not sound like the man who lifted up the children and blessed the women who followed him to the tomb. I want to name that divergence plainly, and I want to do it without pointing a finger at any villain. No shadowy council put those words there. A community of believers, 2 or 3 generations after the apostles, wrote down the Jesus they had come to imagine, and some of it matched the 4 Gospels, and some of it simply did not. That is the honest shape of it. Hold on to that, because in the next part we are going to set this book beside its cousins, the other buried Gospels, and ask the harder question. By what test did the early church decide which of these to keep? Thomas was not alone in that jar, and it was not the only buried gospel that survived. There was a whole family of them, and to weigh Thomas fairly, you have to meet a few of its relatives. So let me introduce 2 more, briefly, because they show you the range of what was circulating outside the 4. The first is the Gospel of Mary. We do not even have all of it. The copy we have is missing, pages torn right out of the middle, so we are reading a book with holes in it. But what survives is striking. In it, Mary Magdalene comforts the frightened disciples after Jesus is gone, and then she tells them about a private vision, a teaching the Lord gave her alone. And the heart of it is the soul's journey upward, the spirit climbing past a ladder of powers that try to hold it down, answering each one, slipping past, rising home. It is a map of the afterlife for the soul that knows the right words, beautiful in its way, and entirely about ascending through secret knowledge, the very thing we saw in Thomas. The second is harder, the Gospel of Judas, which surfaced in the 1970s and was finally made public around 2006. This one takes the man whose name became a curse, the betrayer, and turns him into the hero. In its telling, Judas is not the villain at all. He is the only disciple who truly understood the inside man, the one Jesus secretly asked to hand him over so his spirit could be freed from his body. Read that slowly. It takes the darkest night in the gospel story and flips it into a favor between friends. I will be honest, the first time I read it, my hands went still on the page. It is a bold and unsettling thing to do to a story. Now, what do all three have in common? Mary and Judas and Thomas. They each claim a secret, a private teaching, knowledge handed to one person or a chosen few that the rest of the church never got. And every one of them is quiet or strange about the cross and the bodily resurrection that the four Gospels put dead center. That is the family resemblance. That is the thread. So, here is the question that has to be asked, and asked honestly. With all these Gospels floating around the ancient world, how did the early believers decide which ones to read in church and which ones to set aside? Was it a coin toss, a power grab, or was there a test? There was a test, and it was rougher and more reasonable than the dramatic story suggests. It came down to three plain questions, applied over many years by many hands. First, did this book come from an apostle or someone close to one, someone who actually walked with Jesus or learned from a man who did? Apostolic origin. Second, was it already being read widely in churches scattered across the whole known world, or only in one corner by one teacher's followers? Wide and common use. And third, did it agree with what the church had believed and taught and confessed from the beginning, the core handed down from the start? They called that the rule of faith. You can see where this is going. A book like Thomas, claiming secret words for a chosen few, written generations after the apostles, read by some but never by the broad church, leaning away from the cross at the center of the confession, was going to struggle with all three of those questions. Not because anyone feared the truth, because, measured against the rule the church already lived by, it did not fit. We will dig into that test and into the famous letter that finally drew the line, after we sit for a moment with how a careful believer is supposed to handle any book like this at all. Let me say more about that third test, the rule of faith, because it is the one people misunderstand most. It sounds at first like a way to silence questions. It was actually the opposite. The early church preached out loud in the open to anyone who would stand still. The good news ran through markets and prisons and households of every kind. It was never a members-only secret. So, a gospel that built its whole house on hidden knowledge for the initiated few ran against the grain of the thing from the very beginning. The four Gospels say the message is for all. Thomas and its cousins say the real message is for some. That gap is the heart of it, and the missing pieces only widened that gap. Walk back through what we have seen. No cross in Thomas, no empty tomb. In Mary, the soul climbing past the powers, but no Calvary at the bottom of the ladder. In Judas, the crucifixion turned into a quiet favor instead of the hinge of history. Now set that against what the four hold central. Paul wrote to the Corinthians in the first letter, chapter 15, that if Christ be not risen, then is our preaching vain, and your faith is also vain. He staked everything on a real death and a real rising. The buried Gospels mostly stepped around the very thing the apostles refused to stop talking about. So when the church set these books aside, I have come to understand it as a canon decision with reasons behind it, not a cover-up in the night. Think of it less like a theft and more like a long public sorting. Men holding each book up to the light of those three questions and asking, does this belong with the others? Some books passed, some did not. The ones that did not were not chained in a vault. For the most part, they simply stopped being copied stopped being read aloud, and slowly drifted out of the church's hands. That is how most of them faded. Not erased, outvoted by the rule the church already lived by. Now let me stop being the tour guide for a minute and tell you the truth about where I have wrestled. For a long stretch, the year or two after I lost Della, I was angry at the very idea of a closed Bible. I will admit that plainly. I felt like somebody, somewhere, had decided for me which words I was allowed to hear, and I resented it. I went out and bought every set-aside book I could find, half hoping one of them would hand me the answer the Sunday sermons never had. I wanted Thomas to be the missing key. I wanted Judas to be true, almost, because it would have meant the betrayal was not real and the world was kinder than it looked. And I have had to admit something to myself, slowly, at that table. The more carefully I read these books, the less they comforted me. The light in the stone is lovely, but it never once told me where my wife had gone. I came looking for a secret. What I found was that the men who sorted these books may have been more honest than the part of me that wanted a shortcut. I am still not all the way at peace with how the line got drawn, but I no longer think it was drawn by cowards. This is exactly the moment the old letter speaks to. The first letter of John, chapter 4, verse 1. Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God. Try them. Test them. Do not swallow a thing whole just because it has a holy name stamped on the cover. And do not throw a thing in the fire just because it frightens you. An old believer is allowed to pick up a strange book, read it all the way through, weigh it against the 4 Gospels with his own 2 eyes, and still keep his footing. That is not a loss of faith. I have come to believe it is faith with its eyes open. So let us keep them open, because now we have to talk about the year the fires were lit. There is a year that hangs over this whole story, and I want to give it to you straight, with the name attached. The year is 367. The man is Athanasius, the Bishop of Alexandria, one of the most powerful church leaders of his age. Every spring, it was the custom for the Bishop of Alexandria to send out a festal letter, a pastoral note to the churches under him, setting the date of Easter and offering some teaching for the season. In the spring of 367, Athanasius used his letter to do something that would echo for 16 centuries. He listed the books. He named the 27 writings of the New Testament, the same 27 you carry in your Bible today. And he said, "These are the springs of salvation. Let no one add to them, and let no one take away from them." And then he went further. He warned against what he called the Apocrypha, the hidden books, the ones written under apostles' names that he judged to fall outside the rule the church confessed. Read in church, these, not those. I want you to notice something about that, though. He did it in a letter, signed, sent openly to every congregation. This was not a knife in the dark. It was a bishop putting his name to a judgment in writing for all to read and to argue with if they dared. Now I have to be careful and fair here, because the dramatic version of this story gets the order wrong. Athanasius did not invent the 4 Gospels that morning, and he did not single-handedly decide the Bible by decree. The churches had been reading most of these 27 books for generations already. What the letter did was draw a clear, public line under a sorting that had been going on for a long time. The same 3 tests we walked through, applied over and over by many hands across many cities. He was naming a consensus more than forcing one. I say that not to soften the moment, but to keep us honest about what actually happened. A bishop wrote down what most of the church had already come to hold. But a letter from a powerful bishop has weight. And here is where the story turns from paperwork to fire. Once the line was drawn between the books to be read and the books to be set aside, the set-aside books became a danger to own. To keep copying a gospel the bishop had named as outside the rule was to mark yourself. And not far from Nag Hammadi, up in the hills, sat a great network of monasteries founded by a man named Pachomius. Monks who copied books for a living, who had libraries, who knew exactly which texts had just been declared off limits. And this is the theory that makes the hair on my arms stand up. Many who have studied that jar believe it was those very monks, or someone close to them, who took the forbidden books out of their library, wrapped them, sealed them in a red clay jar, and buried them at the foot of the cliff. Not to destroy them, to save them, to keep them out of the fire that the new ruling made likely. Picture it, a monk by lamplight choosing which books to carry out into the dark, knowing he is not allowed to keep them, unable somehow to throw them in the flame himself. So he digs, he seals the jar, he covers it over with the same soft earth a farmer would come digging for 1,500 years later. Think about the weight of that choice. Whoever buried that jar made a decision in the dark that we are still reading the results of tonight. He could have burned them and been safe. He could have kept them and been in danger. He chose a third path. He gave them to the ground and let the ground decide. I have come to feel something close to gratitude toward that nameless man, whatever I think of the books themselves, because he is the reason we can weigh them at all instead of guessing at ashes. That is the human picture underneath the dates and the bishops, not a faceless conspiracy, one frightened, faithful man with a shovel, refusing to be the one who lit the match. The order came from Alexandria in a signed letter. The jar went into the cliff by a hand we will never name. And for 1,600 years, the argument was settled by silence, the books asleep in the dirt, while the world above forgot they had ever existed. But other copies, in other places, did not find a jar in time. We have to talk about those. So, let me show you what the jar was saved from. In the centuries after that line was drawn, especially once the empire itself had taken the church's side, owning the wrong books stopped being a private matter and became a public risk. Books judged to be outside the rule were gathered and burned. Not everyone, not everywhere, not all at once, and I will not pretend it was a single tidy bonfire. But it happened in cities across the ancient world more than once, and the result is a hole in history we can still measure. Picture the scene, because it deserves to be seen, and not just noted. A courtyard, a pile of papyrus and leather, scrolls and codices stacked like kindling. A torch lowered to the edge. The dry old pages catch fast, the way dry old pages do. And the words that a community had copied by hand, line by patient line, curl and blacken and lift into the air as ash. Whatever was written there, true or strange or beautiful or wrong, is simply gone in the time it takes a fire to breathe. You do not get those words back. No jar saved them. No farmer's mattock will ever strike them. And here is how we know the loss is real and not my imagination. We have lists, ancient writers arguing back and forth, quote books by name, and tear into their ideas books we now possess not one single page of. We know titles. We know a handful of lines, preserved only because somebody copied them down in order to argue against them. The book itself, the whole of it, vanished. It is like holding the spine of a book with every page torn out, reading the title on the cover and nothing else. Whole gospels, whole letters, reduced to a name in someone else's footnote. Sit with that for a moment. Sit with how much breath and ink and devotion went into pages that no living eye will ever read again. I want to be careful here, the way I have tried to be careful all night. I am not going to stand at this table and accuse a faceless they of a crime. The men who burned books in the 4th and 5th centuries believed, most of them, that they were protecting the flock from poison. By their own lights, they were not vandals. They were shepherds with a hard and final tool, and I think they reached for fire too quickly, and I can say that without pretending they were monsters. History is rarely a story of villains twirling their mustaches. It is mostly ordinary, frightened, convinced people doing what they were sure was right, and leaving the rest of us to count the cost. But this is where the whole story bends back on itself, and it is the part I find almost unbearable in the best way. Because while the fires were doing their work above ground, down in the cliff near Nag Hammadi, that sealed jar was keeping its secret. The flames could not reach what the earth had swallowed. And in December of 1945, a man's shovel hit the lid, and the books that had been sentenced to silence 16 centuries before climbed back up into the light. The buried sayings returned, not because anyone above ground had changed their mind, because a jar in the dirt is patient in a way that fire is not. There is a strange grace in that, and I do not use that word loosely. A book can outlive the hand that tried to end it. A page can wait in the ground longer than an empire lasts, and still have ink to give. I am not telling you the Gospel of Thomas is true because it survived. Plenty of false things survive, and plenty of precious things burn. Survival is not proof of anything. But survival did give us the one thing the fire wanted to take, which is the chance to read the words ourselves and weigh them with our own judgment instead of taking a rumor on faith. And that is exactly what we have done tonight. The page is back in front of you. It came up out of the ground, past the fire, across 1600 years, and landed open on a table where an old man could read it to you line by line. You do not have to take my word for what it says. You do not have to take a bishop's word or a critic's word. Read it for yourself. That is the gift the jar gave us. Now let me tell you honestly what I do with it. So, what do I actually do with a book like this? Let me try to be fair to it, name by name, the way a man weighs something he has handled for years. Because the Gospel of Thomas is not worthless, and I would be lying to you if I said it was. Here is what it gives. It is a window. It shows us, better than almost anything else we have, how early some of Jesus' sayings were already moving from mouth to mouth and getting written down. When Thomas hands you the parable of the sower or the mustard seed, nearly word for word with Matthew and Luke, you are seeing proof of just how deep and how early those teachings ran. That is real value. For anyone who wants to understand how the words of Jesus traveled in the first generations, this book is a genuine help. But now, let me name the limit just as plainly. Because honesty has to cut both ways, or it is not honesty. Here is what Thomas cannot hold. There is no death in it and no resurrection. And that absence is not a small gap. It is the whole missing center. A book of 114 sayings, and not one of them is spoken from a cross. Not one of them comes from the far side of an empty tomb. It offers you a light hidden in a stone. It does not offer you a single word of comfort for the grave. I have weighed both sides of this book at my table for years now, and that is where the scale comes down. Beautiful in places, silent exactly where a grieving man needs it to speak. Now set the 4 Gospels back beside it and feel the difference in your hands. The thing Thomas steps around is the very thing Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John refuse to stop talking about. The cross is not an embarrassment to them. It is the hinge the whole door swings on. Listen again to Paul, writing to the Corinthians, in the first letter, chapter 15. Now is Christ risen from the dead, and become the first fruits of them that slept. First fruits, the first of a harvest. He is not just saying Jesus rose. He is saying Jesus rose first, and that the ones who sleep in the ground will follow him up. Do you hear what that does, that Thomas never even attempts? It makes a promise to the dead. It looks straight at the grave, the real one, the one with your name and the names of the people you have buried, and it says, the grave is not the end of the sentence. The four Gospels carry a cross because they carry a funeral, and they carry a funeral because they mean to carry you through it to the other side. The buried sayings give you a riddle to solve. The four Gospels give you a body that walked back out of a tomb. And I will tell you why that distinction stopped being academic for me. Because I have stood at the edge of a grave that mattered more to me than my own life. When you have done that, a gospel that hands you a clever light in a stone and goes quiet about resurrection is not enough. It is lovely, and it is not enough. I did not need a secret to decode on the worst night of my life. I needed a word strong enough to reach into the ground. One book offered me that word, plainly, to anyone who would hold it. The other handed me a beautiful puzzle and walked away from the cemetery. That is the difference I keep landing on. And in the next breath, I want to take you to exactly where that landing happened. Here is the question that started all of this, the one I have circled the whole way through. Where do the dead go? When you are young, you do not ask it with your whole body. You say the words at funerals, and you half believe them, and you go home. But there comes a season, late, when the question stops being a line in a creed and becomes the only thing you actually want to know. For me, that season came the winter after I buried my wife. I had said I believed in the resurrection my whole life. Standing over that grave, I realized I had never once leaned my full weight on it, and I needed to know if it would hold. That is what sent me to the shelf. That is why I read the buried books at all, Thomas and Mary and Judas and the rest. I was not hunting a controversy. I was a man who could not sleep, looking for anyone, ancient or modern. Who would tell me plainly what happens to the people we put in the ground? I read them all, looking for that one answer, and I want to tell you gently what I found and did not find. There was one night, that first winter, when I could not stay in the bed. I came out to this table and I read until the dark thinned. And the line that finally held me was not from any book that came out of that jar. It was the oldest comfort in the faith I was raised in, the word that the one who died came back. And because he came back, the grave is a door and not a wall. The buried sayings gave me a great deal to think about. They did not give me that. Only the gospel my mother sang reached all the way down into where I actually hurt. I am not going to dress that up into a slogan. I am just telling you what happened to one old man at one table on one long night. And let me say this carefully, because it matters more than anything else I have told you. What I have shared tonight is one telling, one man's reading, weighed as honestly as I know how. Scripture invites us into the story, and what you have heard from me is one telling of it. The text is deeper than any retelling can capture, deeper than my reading, deeper than the bishop's letter, deeper than the buried sayings themselves. I am not the last word on any of this. I am a printer with a shelf of old books and a grave I visit, doing his best to read straight. So here is where I land, and then the choosing is yours. I do not throw the Gospel of Thomas in the fire, and I do not put it on the altar. I keep it on the shelf where it belongs, as a real and ancient window into how the words of Jesus traveled. With my eyes open to the places it goes, quiet, and the places it veers. And when the night gets long and the question gets heavy, I do not reach for the secret sayings. I reach for the 4 Gospels and the cross they carry, and the empty tomb they will not stop describing. Because that is the only word I have found that is strong enough to follow someone into the ground. That is the verse that backs me up. That is the page I trust. You have heard them both now, side by side. You decide which one you carry. If you are still with me this far into the night, then you are the kind of person I made this for. Not someone looking for a fight, and not someone looking to have their fears confirmed. Someone who wants to look honestly at a hard thing and not flinch. My daughter Renee has been after me for years to write this down. Daddy, she says, people need to hear this. Do not keep it to yourself. So here it is, baby, and here it is for you watching too. I want you to know that you are allowed to do what we did tonight. You are allowed to pick up the strange book, read it all the way through, weigh it against the Gospels you trust, and come out the other side with your faith intact and your eyes wider open. Looking did not cost me my footing. I believe it will not cost you yours either, because that is the whole spirit of this channel and the whole spirit of that old letter. Try the spirits. Do not swallow everything and do not burn everything. Read with your judgment awake. An honest believer has nothing to fear from an honest look at a page, even a buried one, even a strange one, even one that 2,000 years of dust tried to keep from your hands. So, let me ask you something real, not a trick to make you tap a button. Which book do you want me to open next? I have a whole shelf of them here by the table, the ones the church set aside, waiting. Tell me in the comments which one you want read out loud and weighed line by line, the way we did with Thomas tonight. The Gospel of Mary, with its torn pages and its climbing soul. The Book of Enoch, with the watchers and the place where the dead wait. Jubilees, Jasher, name it, and I will take it down. And if a single word sums up what tonight did for you, leave me that word. Thomas, if the sayings stayed with you. Kept, if you walked away surer of the 4 you already hold. I read them. They tell me where to dig next. And if these long, honest nights are something you want more of, then subscribe and stay close, because the next book goes deeper than this one did, and I would rather walk into it alongside you than alone. I read the comments at this same table, late after the lamp is the only light in the house. When you tell me which book to open, you are deciding what we study together next. That is not a small thing to me. A man who lives alone with a shelf of old books takes good company where he finds it. And lately, I have come to find a good deal of it in the people who sit through these to the end. Now let me say plainly where the whole night leaves us, so no one carries away the wrong thing. The church did not commit a crime against you by setting these books aside. I have come to understand it as a canon decision with real reasons behind it. A long and public sorting by men holding each book up to 3 honest questions. Some of those men reached for fire too fast, and I have said so. But the line itself was not drawn by thieves in the dark. It was drawn by a community trying, imperfectly, to guard the message that had been handed to them. Hold that picture in your mind instead of the dramatic one. Not a vault and a lie, but a long argument carried out in the open, in letters with names signed at the bottom, over which books carried the apostle's voice and which did not. You can disagree with where they drew the line. I sometimes do. But disagreeing with a decision is a far cry from believing you were robbed. And after all of it, after reading every set-aside page I could find, the four Gospels are still the ones I come home to. They are the anchor I let down when the water gets deep. That is not me telling you what to believe. That is just one old printer telling you honestly where he dropped his. So whoever you are, wherever you are sitting tonight, I want to speak something simple over you before I go. May you have the courage to look at hard things without fear. May you have the steadiness to weigh them without losing your footing. And may you find, the way I finally found, a word strong enough to hold you on the night you need holding most. We are all under the one God, the searchers and the settled alike, and there is room at that table for an honest question. Walk in truth, friend. Keep your eyes open and your feet under you. One last thing before you go. This is how I read Scripture, not a prophetic word. I quote from the King James Version, unless I say otherwise. If you read it differently, I want to hear it. Drop your thought in the comments.